By the way, if you're sending me DMs or like Slacks to not talk about this, I'm not reading them. I'm not, because I want to keep talking about it. Hey everybody, welcome to the second episode of Building Jam, where we give you a glimpse of what it's like building an early stage startup like Jam. And today we have a special guest with us, Tony Stuck, who's our head of engineering. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks for doing this, Tony.
I guess my challenge is somewhat maybe on theme with a lot of the topics that we discussed, which is starting to really internalize what it's going to be like to increase the engineering team size by another 50%. With Justin starting this week, I've really started to have to think about like, all right, what is going to break? You know, like we're at the beginning of the hard part, right? Like I would expect that Urtifa and Danny and I are going to have some challenging conversations over the coming months of how to deal with certain things that used to work and no longer work, and we'll have to figure those out.
Yeah, you know, I know you're talking about challenging conversations. I'm not gonna say outright that, oh, I'm looking forward to them, but I just want to take a moment to like celebrate. You know, 3 more people joining. Man, we put so many hours and effort into making sure we hire great people. Everyone in this room seriously like helped, and so many more people. But I'm so happy that like we're done with this, like for now.
So we spent like 2.5 months at least trying to hire, and got almost no one to the final round. Like it was a lot of Urtifa like doing a huge bucket, chatting with a huge bucket of people, filtering that down, and then I would filter it down, and then someone would get through the pair programming, and then no one would make it to the end. And it was really like, holy crap, are we doing this right? Like, are we doing it wrong? Those were reflecting times. But then like the floodgates opened, and all of a sudden we had a ton of people, and like, and then we actually had to now we had to like just cut really good candidates off of like, crap, like we're done. Sorry.
I remember like a week before we made 3 offers in a row, we had 2 crisis meetings, both saying, what are we doing wrong about our interviewing process? Should we rethink the whole thing?
Yeah.
But one last thing on like, I feel like the culture of the team, I think is really notable, is during that crisis mode, the engineering team got together and we're like, okay, what's wrong with like our interview process or our final round interview? Why can't people pass this? Like, are we being too specific or hard or whatever it is, or is the prompt wrong? And then I explained like some of the organizational challenges, and one of the things I mentioned was how many people Urtifa has been interviewing, and like just the empathy that the team had of like, oh my god, like I can totally see how Urtifa is like really struggling right now, because like they get like 1 interview a month or something, right? Like whoever can make it to the end, they get so few, they see so little of that. But when I explained that to them of like the amount of work going into it, it was really kind of validating of just like the team, just the empathy that the team has for everyone is awesome.
That's so great.
Thank you for sharing that. That feels very nice. You know, genuinely, the next thing that I'm gonna say is a joke, but I want to like take a moment to just appreciate that and then tell the jokes. It really means a lot. But have you guys ever watched the show like Bachelor or Bachelorette? Okay. Don't ask me how I got into it. But basically, like whenever like they gave this kind of compliment or like they say something like vulnerable, the other person always says, "Thank you so much for sharing that. That took a lot of courage." That's how I feel like in this moment. Tony, just curious, you know, like what do you think took so long? And by long, I mean we started our process seriously in November, and then in April we gave the first offer. What do you think like took so long?
Good question. I mean, I guess there's a couple factors. I think the hard one is the team is so small. So you're not just like, we've interviewed tons of really smart engineers, right? Like the problem wasn't necessarily, or the challenge wasn't necessarily finding smart engineers. The challenge was kind of finding smart engineers that understood the phase of the company that we're at, the size of it, like would work well in the size of the company that we're in. And like I've worked with very, very smart engineers that could work really well in a larger organization where they can they have a little bit more, I don't know, autonomy is the wrong word, but like they can solve their problems and they are kind of shielded from the rest of the organization, and they might not do well needing to interact with different, like cross-functionally, which every single engineer on the team today has to interact with marketing, with Ivana, and talk to Danny, talk to like everybody, right? You have to be able to, communication is a huge factor in a company of this size. So trying to find somebody that fits all of those pieces is not easy.
I think it's so funny that you're saying like how communication is like such an important skill that you're hiring for like at the startup level for engineering, because I feel like at least like from my side, like marketing communication, sure, like it's important at a startup, but like really it becomes like the bulk of your job when you're like at a bigger company. Like one of the reasons that I like startups so much is because like I don't have to be constantly communicating all the time, you know. So like, but in engineering, it's like I guess the opposite.
It could be kind of the opposite. Yeah. Like if you're in a 100-person engineering org and you're part of a team of 5 that is like sitting in this corner of a larger organization, and you've got an engineering manager on top of you and a director on top of that. And like, you've got all these layers of communication that kind of get handled for you in a sense.
Like, let's be honest, like we didn't learn this, the job description, like thinking, okay, this is exactly the person we went for. Like, because the reason why we had to do a lot of these interviews in the early days of the process was because we had to calibrate it. Because a person might look really great on their resume, and I'm sure they're great, but like Tony said, for our specific role where they have to know a lot of different parts of our code base, you can't just be front end, you can't just be back end, you can't just be database expert, and at the same time you have to care about product quality, and at the same time know how to talk to marketing and product. You cannot just go to an interview and ask like a question like, hey, do you match all of those criterias? Like you just can't, right? So you have to find other ways to figure out if this is the right person or not. For example, because it's like like Jam's a Chrome extension, and there's a lot of front-end components, a lot of like front-end engineers like naturally apply to Jam. And then when they will come in and they'll talk to us, and they're amazing people. Some of them, I know them personally. I've worked with them before. They're fantastic. But if the candidate is talking about, oh, I want to introduce a design system, like I want to do these like big company things or very front-end centric things, that just wasn't like a good match for us. And only after some like iterations and like talking to Tony and Danny, we realized, okay, what we really want is someone who's really good at backend, but also okay at writing front-end code and want to learn how to do like React stuff. Is that right, Tony? Do you think like that's eventually the right way to like think about what we're hiring for?
Yeah, I think that a lot of our front-end problems are what they term as like the back end of the front end, right? Like we are where we're at in especially in the extension development land is very kind of, they're not just UI problems. Like we're trying to deal with memory pressure and how to CU load on client and complex problems that if you, whatever, I don't know, just like only knew React, you might not be able to really analyze those problems at the depth that we need to be able to analyze them at this point, because we're dealing in like the long tail of random website X. Like Jam works great on, whatever, most websites, but then you've got this long tail where, some developer does something a little bit different or a little weird or whatever, and it causes problems, and we have to find the true root cause of what's going on, because we'll end up, if we don't, we'll end up fixing it for that website and then breaking it for 2 other websites. So it's like, we can't afford to do that anymore.
Yeah. I've been asking, like every time I like chat with founders the last few days, I've been asking them like, hey, we're about to go from like 15 to 20 quite fast. Like, what are all the things that are going to break? Actually, maybe before I tell you what they said, what do you think will break?
So what would break? I think there's going to be a bunch of stuff that breaks, or that we have to adapt to is maybe a better way of putting it. And some of those things we're not going to know until we get there, and other ones we will know. Like right now, we don't use any sort of Scrum or Agile processes, right? Like, and maybe depending on how the team wants to work, a lot of this, from my perspective, is like what works best for the team. I don't like to implement process for the sake of process. Like process needs to help the team. And so if the team decides that those tools would be helpful to organize their work and allow us to move at the speed that we want to move, then that makes sense, and I'm happy to do that. But if we can figure out other ways of solving, it's all about solving the problem. Whatever the problem is, the tools are the means to the end, and not necessarily the reason why we want to do those things. So I feel like processes will change. Current things that we do today will not scale, increasing the engineering team size 50%. Like right today, we are a small enough group that we can make a lot of decisions as a group. That has worked in a small team of 3 people, and then we went to 4 and then to 6. I don't know that that's going to work at 9 engineers. We'll probably need to like kind of break up into smaller groups and assign responsibility and ownership over certain concepts or parts of the code base or something, to be like, you guys need to tell the rest of us how it needs to be done and own the responsibility of making that happen, so everybody can continue to work at the pace we need to.
Wait, Tony, can you talk more about that? Like, what do you mean?
So let's see. So we have multiple parts of the product, right? Like we've got the Chrome extension, which is its own beast, right? Like that alone is a huge footprint. It's probably the largest footprint in the system. And that has a whole different set of problems and challenges, right? Like it is its own distributed system, self-contained. And we haven't even talked about the rest of the application yet, right? Like it has multiple components and they all need to communicate with each other. They all have different parts and like responsibilities that they consume, and we need to like pass data all over the place. So there's patterns there and challenges. And like I mentioned, like the performance and memory challenges that are all wholly contained in the extension. So there's probably that. And then all of a sudden we need to start talking about, our dashboard, or like the jam dashboard, where you log in and see all the jams you created. That's just a single page React app that has a whole bunch of different challenges, right? And those are between just the extension and those have 2 very different sets of problems. And so rather than having 9 people trying to solve all of those problems concurrently, it's going to make a lot more sense to give a few people the ownership to solve some of those problems in isolation. And then you've got the whole backend, which has multiple components to it and multiple backend systems and services. And there's scaling challenges on that side for scaling our WebSocket services. So hopefully that helps.
Can you talk about what you said when you're like, right now we can all discuss as a team, but when the engineering team grows 50% all at once, we can't? I guess
so we run a weekly engineering meeting with the whole engineering team. That's an hour long. And there are standard run-of-the-mill kind of items that we cover, and then there's like kind of an open floor where anybody can kind of bring up topics that they want to talk about. And up till now, we've kind of been able to talk about those topics and largely come up with solutions to those topics as a group. Sometimes we can discuss it as a group for a half hour or something, and we kind of narrow in on the problem a little bit more, and then it's like, okay, Cyrus is gonna take a couple action items and come back next week with like a doc that sums up things or has a couple more proposals. Those things will still happen, but like I think some of those discussions will be broken up at an earlier stage into smaller groups, because otherwise with 9 people in a conversation about whether we should use MobX or some other like data management solution, I'm afraid it could become like a design by committee situation where we talk for an hour and nothing gets done.
So it sounds like with the size of our current team, where you could make a decision as a team with like minimal amount of like homework or like follow-up tasks, just because like the size and the surface area that's like increasing in our product. You probably have to adapt to a style where you'll have to do some like pre-work, maybe writing like a document where people review, or like break up into like smaller groups to come up with decisions rather than just like one big group making decision like together.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that this is not a bad. What I'm gonna say is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it is what it is, which is there is more opinions in the room, right? And so when you have more opinions, it's harder to get consensus. So when it's a small group, a couple opinions, you guys can hash it out in like 15 minutes and kind of align and be like, cool, okay, I see the pros and cons. Let's go this way. Once you start getting more perspectives and more opinions, this is software. There's 10 ways to solve the same problem. And so oftentimes it's not about like what solution is the best, but it's like, to me, it's about focusing on like what is the core problem and like all the other factors. Like is time a factor, or like is getting this right? Like this is going to be a foundational thing that's going to drive the next couple years of engineering and product development. So getting that right is super important. So spending another week or 2 weeks even to like really think something through is nothing in comparison to having to rewrite the thing every 6 months and spending months worth of engineering time on it.
I have a question. I'm curious what you think. Right now, the team is sort of used to everyone getting a say and an opinion on every decisions we make. But do you think in this, what you're saying is like, okay, when the engineering team goes from 6 to 9 people, all of a sudden, then not everyone gets to have a say. And like, you have to have just like smaller groups responsible for things. How do you think the existing team is going to take it? Like, do you think people are going to be like, that's fine? Or they're going to be like, oh, I used to get to have a say about this, and now I kind of feel out of the loop?
I think if people want to have a say, they can have a say. I think there's also a function of topic interest. Some people are interested in certain problems more than others, so people will gravitate towards wanting to solve certain classes of problems more so than they will other ones. And so I feel like there's some natural equilibrium that happens there. Like if all we hired was a bunch of, I don't know, like Postgres experts, then trying to just add a single table to a database would take forever. So we don't do that. But I feel like there will be, part of this is also then people that want to like raise their hand and say like, yeah, like this is either the topic that I want to bring up and I want to drive it, and some people can jump on board and like, let's solve that problem, or people that volunteer to be like, this sounds cool, like, or a couple people volunteer and say, okay, this sounds cool, I'm happy to help with this.
I think, Erdeva, this is sort of like a way to kind of also bring us back to the hiring. So like, how do you sort of determine like the skill level that somebody needs, right, to come in to be an engineer at Jam?
I guess maybe to give you my perspective on how I think about this is, so we often, or sometimes we'll talk about, oh, we need another one of these people. We need another Ivana, right? And in the engineering world, needing another person, we need another, whatever, me, I'll use me as an example or something. I don't actually want a bunch of me's or a bunch of whoever else is on the team, because you don't get like that diversity of perspective, or everybody has a different personality. So like sometimes you're hiring not necessarily for the absolute smartest person, and they are smarter than everybody else on the team, but you're also hiring for like, where are there like gaps in or voids in some of like the team dynamics? Like where's somebody that maybe has a little more empathy, or has a little more drive of like really, really wanting to move fast, but also understands that like, we need to think about some other stuff. So there's different, like, I guess, personality traits that you can pick for to kind of form like a kind of cohesion where you've got these different pieces, where you've got a couple people that really like to move fast, and they will kind of pull everybody else with them to keep that pace up. And you've got other people that are like deeper thinkers that will help pull back on the people that want to move really fast and make them realize like, hey, this is a really important decision we need to make. Let's kind of take a little bit extra time. So all those perspectives kind of factor into finding the right person. So we've definitely turned down amazing candidates where it was like, if we were, twice the size, it would be an absolute hell yes. But like right now, just doesn't. It's unfortunate, but it's not the right fit.
We had a lot of those.
Can I tell you guys? So last night the fire alarm went off in my apartment building, and because it's an apartment building in San Francisco, I run into another USV portfolio founder. So we're chatting about our startups, and I was like, hey, we're about to go from 15 people to 20 people. Like, how is that for you guys? Like, what's going to happen? And he said some really interesting things. So first he said the type of people you hire from 15 to 20 are slightly different than the type of people you hire from like 0 to 15, in that they're more specialized. And so like if you're in a domain specific company, so like his was more like specific, like kind of like a healthcare type, versus like, for us it's sort of SaaS software. You like bring in like more legal and compliance. And so like, but those hires happen then. Thought that was interesting. And then he also said like, all of a sudden you're going to hear people say, oh, I didn't know that was happening, where like that has never happened before. Like everyone sort of knows everything that's happening, but suddenly there are communication gaps where you realize communication didn't flow. And then you become a lot more formal about how you communicate. I thought that was really interesting.
Wait, what?
Like what do you mean? Like,
what?
Because it's like too big now and you're not in the same office. You have to send like comms updates, basically.
Yeah.
About what is going on around in the company?
Yeah.
Dear sir or madam to like my team.
Yeah.
Sincerely,
Yeah.
Ivana.
Can we stop hiring?
I mean, those things are kind of true already today, right? Like we have 2 major projects that we've been working on for months. And at least from the engineering side, the engineers involved in each of those projects don't have a full picture of what the status of each of those projects are, or how close each of them are to shipping. Those things we're already starting to experience that.
Yeah, totally.
What was the other thing, Danny, you learned?
Before that, I went to a different founder. So she was like, which functions are expanding as you were 15 to 20? And so I was like, we're going from 1 designer to 2. And she said, oh, that's a really big jump, actually, because right now there's 1 person who can just make decisions. And if you have 2 designers and they're both just making decisions, it doesn't work because it's disjointed. And like you actually need them to coordinate, so it feels like one cohesive thing, and like the patterns match across the product. And yeah, like that's like a shift. And I thought that was interesting too.
Like when I hear that, like I have this like internal conflict, because a part of me, I think like the stronger part of me is like, no, let's just keep 1 designer who gets to design and make the decisions, so we can, I know, so we can like reduce the time to like make decisions, because they can just keep it in their head, no need to like create patterns, we can move fast. But the other part of me is like we gotta grow, and maybe a little bit of investments need to happen in creating the design patterns so we can like scale and add more designers. I think the hard part always is the timing. Like, when is the actual time? Like, of course, like we're feeling the pull right now. Like Ivana was just gesturing at me when I was saying that. But is it a strong enough pull? Like, I don't know. Maybe it is. To Ivana, it is.
This morning we did, here's what the team is working on in May. And then all the time, it was like, here's what we're working on in May. Timeline, TBD, depending on design. Like, there might be a pattern.
Yeah.
Guys, we can just hire an AI agent who can design for us.
Right.
Did anyone you talked to give you any interesting numbers or ratios to think about, like the engineering to designer ratio? Like is having 9 engineers to a single designer like too much, too little? Like if you think about, I don't know how, whatever Slack had, or some companies had the whole tribe model, right? Where it was like you had like a couple engineers, a designer, and a PM, and they just run. And it's like, so the idea of having 9 engineers and a single designer, sounds.
Before Danny answers that question, it's okay. I'm not coming in with an opinion right now. Tony, what was it like? Like you were at Cloudflare, a very early day, where I think you were one of the first front end engineers at Cloudflare, right? And you're working with like designers. What was the what was the ratio like for like engineers to designers?
Well, Cloudflare was unique in the sense that a majority of the engineers were not dealing with anything dealing with our website, right? Like when I joined, I was effectively the only one actually touching JavaScript code for the most part. There was a couple like full stack engineers that would be doing API work and come in and like tweak some stuff on the UI, but I was the only one that was like fully in charge of the front end at that point. So it was me and one other designer for a while, for like almost 2 years. And before we started to like scale that up. So I'm trying to think of, I don't quite remember how many front end engineers we really had before the design team started growing. But that, I guess the complexity here, which Ivana kind of was, again, like you said, gesturing at, was like the product designer we had at Cloudflare back in the day. It was great when he was just designing the product. And then all of a sudden, the marketing organization started spinning up and he started getting pulled in two directions. And that's when his life started to get a little more challenging.
Yeah.
We don't have that problem. I'm just kidding. Ivana was literally talking to me about like, there's so much we want to go on the marketing side, and it would be incredible to have like design help.
Yeah, but honestly, like I feel like, I'm super excited about the second designer, but again, like I understand that we're probably still going to be prioritizing product design. Like my life is not getting fixed yet. Maybe the third designer.
So as we wrap, I thought we could go around like we did last time, which is like, what's the biggest challenge for you this week? Like as we're building Jam.
I can start. I'm doing ops, business, finance, all of this stuff. And as we were not planning to hire another designer. So like now that we're thinking about hiring another designer, we sort of like threw a wrench into all of the financial planning that I did. And I have to like rework all of that math.
Sorry, you're the
It's okay. It's my job. But that also changes like other factors, like runway and like things like that, which is pretty normal. Like that's true for any company. But like that's something that I'm like thinking about, and what does that look like in the long term for us as a company? Because I'm pretty sure that's not the only person we're going to hire again this year. Probably someone more in marketing designer. Yeah, that's something that I'm working on and thinking about.
I can go next. My challenge this week, I think it's sort of like I'm in this process of like learning a lot of things right now, because just like the Jam company is evolving and getting bigger, my job is starting to change, and like there are things about it that are sort of kind of like on autopilot. I mean, there's still somebody like me that needs to go and do it, but it's like there's a playbook, there's a formula, like it's working. And so then there's like some new things that are getting added onto it, and these new things have to do like with we're with like partnerships, and like a few cool things that like we're launching, and they are like a little bit more strategic than usual. Usually I've like been like execution mode, and so this is sort of like asking me to like be a little bit more strategic and also execute. So it's like I need to learn to be able to say like, not whenever like Danny asks me something, for example, like she's like, so we're launching on Tuesday, right? And I'll be like, yes, absolutely, even though like that's not what I was thinking. So I need to learn like when somebody asks me something, it's not because they expect me to just go ahead and do it. It's because like you want to know what I think about it and why, if it is not Tuesday, like the reasoning behind that. And so it's like I'm so used to like yes, and then I'll figure it out. And now it's like kind of going back, shifting from like not yes and I'll figure it out to actually like thinking in the moment, is it actually a yes? And that's like a challenge.
By the way, that's such good feedback for me. Like basically what I'm hearing from you is when I ask questions, I should be clear about whether I'm asking for like your recommendation or if I'm asking to fact check. Like that's basically what I just heard, which is awesome.
Nice.
the challenge for me this week is last week we were in Colombia all together, and so I cleared my calendar to make sure that like we have time in person to spend together, like and what that means that this week is just like full of calls, and that's fine. But the thing that feels bad this week is when like Urtifa will DM me and be like, I have something important to discuss. And I'm like, can you do it the very end of the day? Like, I just feel like the worst teammate this week in like every conversation. Like, Chris and I just did final staging review of, and I was like, Chris, I have 40 minutes. Can we rush through the whole thing? And of course, a design review that's trying to be crammed into 40 minutes feels awful because you're like, this is like, got to fix this, like, instead of being like, how does this experience feel, right? And so anyway, so I feel like a sort of rushed teammate, which is like worst version of like showing up at Jam. That's maybe the challenge this week.
Thank you everyone for listening to this episode this week. We would love to know y'all in the comment section what you want to hear from us. The things that we are talking about in these episodes are when we were like product managers, engineers, we wanted to know from other founders what they were building, how they were building their startups. So we're sharing those, like nuggets that would have been helpful to us. Would love to know as getting started what you would love to know. Just put your thoughts in the comments, and we'd love to cover those in the next few episodes.